Good afternoon, this is Gary Kavanagh here at TRSI. I'm here today with my friend and colleague, Michael Dwyer. Today is a good week from the basis of news production, perhaps not from other viewpoints. But you often struggle when you're putting together these shows to know what you're going to talk about. But thankfully, Michael, we were blessed with the news that James Lawless is going to make the NCT tougher.
Yes, and I'm sure that this morning that's what everybody woke up and thought, oh, I know what they'll be talking about. It'll be the NCT, won't it? Yeah.
Either that or someone trying to kill Donald Trump.
Oh, did someone try? Oh, yeah, that's right. But they didn't kill him, Gary. So is it really a story?
That's the real question, and it's a little bit too obvious, I think.
Yeah, it's a bit on the nose, isn't it? Also, it's attempted assassination. It's a bit like attempted murder. I mean, how is that really a crime?
No, given our commitment to ensuring that this podcast is as unpopular as possible, this is the perfect time to talk about something like alpaca shearing in the Himalayas and how it impacts on European-wide negotiations on some other topic.
Well, I think we should be more interested in baby alpaca shearing because there are obviously cruelty concerns there. But baby alpaca is what people are using instead of cashmere these days.
Michael worked in the industry.
Ah, of course. But still, you have to say, Gary, beautiful hand feel off baby alpaca and very high warmth factor. So, what can you do?
Are you familiar with the comedian Shane Gillis?
The name is familiar. I'm not sure.
He has a special, he's very good. He has a special called Beautiful Dogs. But he has a bit in it where he's talking about how Trump is a hilarious president and he would also be the funniest president to see get shot because of how he would take it. That he'd see the shooter and just be like, sit down, you're gay.
Yeah.
And then just make a sound as, funny sound as he got shot. And we now know that's not true. Trump actually takes being shot, it appears, in the side of the head really well. I don't think I've ever seen anyone else take getting shot in the side of the head as well as Trump took it.
Anyway, shall we start at the beginning?
Yes, so yesterday Trump was giving a rally. He's given hundreds of these rallies. There's absolutely nothing terribly interesting about it. Being broadcast on live TV. And at a certain point, you hear, Michael, a series of bangs and Trump kind of turning and then Secret Service all over Trump, taking him to the ground.
Yeah. And
it appears that someone attempted to assassinate Donald Trump. Now, when Trump gets back up, and even on because it's a well-attended event, there were press photographers there, and there are some fantastic photos that have come out of it. So the photos when Trump came down and the video when he comes back up, you can see his ear is bloody, there's blood kind of dripping across his face, and it appears that the assassin just missed him and hit the tip of his ear instead and just grazed the tip of his ear. Also killed at least one person in the crowd. Reports are a bit back and forth at this time. Some are saying 2 dead, including the shooter, who was killed by a counter-sniper team within seconds of this, and at least 1 dead in the crowd, and then possible of 1 to 2 critical, although that's still very much up in the air. Things are, as we're recording this, are incredibly fluid. It's not quite clear what is happening or what has happened or who the shooter is, but the raw facts of it appear to be an assassination attempt on a presidential candidate and former president for reasons that are as yet unknown. In a manner, Michael, where, you go an inch to the side, this is a very different conversation.
Did you see that clip with, they were talking to a man who had been in the crowd who was an emergency room physician, and he said he'd given CPR. So, but there was brain matter, and they think that man appeared to be dead. So that was I wasn't sure exactly what they were talking about, if that was the shooter. So that would make more sense, because another eyewitness had said that not long after the shots rang out, then the response by the snipers had blown his head off, I think was the comment made by the eyewitness. So there may be people, it's unclear, but there's probably at least 2 people dead, including the shooter. America is not without a history of political violence against candidates and against presidents. So these things are shocking, but not, I suppose, in a sense, surprising. The whole thing is weird, though, Gary, isn't it? I mean, first of all, just a practical sense, you've seen the map, I've seen the video of the location from different shots. He's in a stable position. He has a rifle, and presumably he could have got any rifle that he'd wanted. I mean, he could with highly, something very accurate with a scope. He's not that far away on what doesn't appear to have been a storm, and he got off several shots. Am I right? They talked several shots, and he missed.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things about this is that this appears to be a massive security failure on the part of the Secret Service. So, from a map of the area, you have Trump he's in a place called Butler in Pennsylvania, and he's basically in the middle of a field. There are police snipers behind him, there's some buildings beside him, and then about maybe 150, 200 yards away, that's an estimate, we don't actually have an exact kind of distance, there is a elevated building with a roof sloping away so you wouldn't have full line of sight on it, and which had an open and unimpeded shot at Donald Trump. And the Secret Service didn't have anyone on that roof, nor behind the building, where there was a ladder that they couldn't see, where someone could get up onto a roof, which is basically exactly what happened. Someone climbed up that ladder, set up a position there, took one shot at Trump, seems then to, wings him, and then basically shoots a number of other shots. It's unclear which shot killed the civilian in the crowd. It's unclear if any of the others, well, they're saying critical people, so other shots must have also gone into the crowd. And then he is, in this video of this, he is killed within seconds by a counter-sniper team on the building behind Trump. Now, they're saying that the counter-sniper team had sight of that building, that they should have been able to see him. But I have been in locations where you've had, the vice president and the Secret Service, Michael, it might shock you, they tend to take their job really seriously. It is an incredible security failing. It's an incredibly obvious point from which to take a shot at Donald Trump, and it was left totally unguarded. And someone also found out that it was being totally unguarded. So, just a disaster for the Secret Service. And as we said, an inch to the side, and the Secret Service would have just had a presidential candidate's head blown off.
There's an interview conducted with a local man by a BBC reporter. And again, listen, one thing we're very cognizant of is the fact that we're talking about this in the fairly immediate aftermath of the event. And we're talking about eyewitness accounts, and eyewitness accounts are famously unreliable, and people get confused information, and we're relying on the information that's coming out from the media. And things may change and stories may change. But at the moment, it doesn't seem like a very complex situation. It's not full of nuances or strange incidents or dogs not barking. This guy, he seemed to be very clear, and he was with other people who all seemed to have the same story. From what he was saying, they were standing there and they looked up and they saw a guy, as he said, I think bear crawling. I presume that means like on your tummy, crawling with a rifle. They said we could see it was a rifle. It was clear as day. And we're going, and the impression was that he and his family or friends were going to the cops and to others. There's a guy up there climbing up the roof with a rifle. Look at the guy with the rifle. Look at the guy with the rifle. And this went on for some minutes until eventually he got up to the roof and he took a position and eventually actually let off some shots. But at this stage, this has been going on and he said that the police on the ground were doing nothing. He seemed to be of the strong opinion that the civil service were aware that they were jumping up and down and pointing at this guy and going, guy with a rifle. Now, my understanding was, Gary, and could be completely flawed, that in any situation like this, everybody's in communication. They all have their earpieces, and one person says the word gun. You don't wait for the guy to shoot. You don't say, well, we'll let him shoot. We don't know if it's a gun. Somebody says the word gun. Immediately, the protected person is surrounded, brought to the ground, put into the car, and gone. And you investigate afterwards if it was, in fact, a gun, or somebody with a water pistol, or with an unfortunately shaped aubergine. You don't hang around. According to this guy, anyway, they're there, and there's some minutes, and the cops are on the ground looking up, and the Secret Service are doing nothing. The whole thing is bizarre. Now, unsurprisingly, the fact that it's weird and confusing and that people make mistakes, which is something that happens when human beings are involved in things, will inevitably, Gary, lead to all sorts of speculation. And I think we already have seen quite some turn on the internet from our friends on the left, saying that it wasn't really an assassination attempt at all.
Ah, yes, that it was staged, that he cut himself with a razor or scissor as he went down, that it was too clean. The photos that came out of it were too good. They go too hard.
Yeah.
And to be fair, if you haven't seen it, there is a photo taken by an AP photographer from below where it's Trump surrounded by Secret Service people with his fist in the air, shouting out, and in the top right-hand corner is just the American flag.
Yeah, against a blue sky background. It's a great photo.
Yeah, he's got blood smeared over his face. It's just an incredible photo. It's the kind of photo you look at and your gut reaction is like, this is probably over. Like, this election is probably done.
I mean, it's not quite, but it's up there with EAG, man, the flag kind of thing. It's a fantastic image.
I will have to say this, like, as someone who does a bit of shooting, 150 yards from an elevated position where it's a stable position, you are lying down, you've got a rifle, 150 yards is not a difficult shot.
No, there are snipers, Gary, that'll shoot people at a mile. That's a difficult shot. Yeah, I mean, these are very... But frankly, my father would shoot rabbits with a .22 caliber without a scope at 150 yards. I wouldn't, but my father would.
Yeah, I really do not understand how this part of this happened and how grievous a fuck up this is on the part of the Secret Service. And on the stuff about this being fake, I think the immediately obvious thing is that the Secret Service are not going to take part in a fake assassination attempt, and anyone who attempted something like this was almost certainly going to be killed within seconds.
Yes.
So if it was a fake, you've a commitment to the bit and you've someone willing to die for it.
This is a guy who has committed to the bit in a way that is admirable. Really, really well done.
But just on the thing about the security thing, when you look at maps of this area, he's at, it's the Butler Farm, it's a show. He's got buildings behind him, they have counter snipers on them, that's fine. And then when you look at kind of the mile around him, there's only really one or two places where there's an unimpeded view of him and someone could take a shot. And the place that the shot came from is the most obvious of them. So the question becomes, the Secret Service know what they are doing. Why was there no one on that roof? Even if they thought they had sight of it, the roof slopes away. They clearly did not have as good sight of it as they should have had. And, what happened here? So I think presidential candidates and former presidents do not get the level of security that the president gets. So perhaps it was a capacity issue. Perhaps they were working with local police and there was confusion over it. But something went very fucking badly wrong for a location like that not to be secured. And it's just a grievous fuck up of the type that the Secret Service is unlikely to make. And in this case, is going to be deeply humiliated by having made. And had he been killed, it would be even worse for them.
Oh, not a nightmare for them.
Yeah, which is, some people have brought that up and in the sort of, this was deliberate. The damage this will have to the reputation and operations of the Secret Service is going to be extreme. The Republicans in Congress and probably the Democrats in Congress are going to fall on them like a ton of bricks for this. Because an important point to remember here is that these are the people who protect everyone. So everyone has an interest in, maybe don't leave incredibly obvious sniper spots open.
Whoever was in charge of this particular detail at this particular event, I'd imagine he isn't going to, or she, will not be looking forward to much advancement in the service. And maybe if they've 25 years done, it might be time to take a pension and consider an alternative, because somebody is going to get blamed, Gary. Somebody always has to get blamed. And on the face of it, as you say, it looks like a very grievous failure. But caveat, who knows what we will discover in the next week, what instructions may or may not have been given by the... there's a word they use, is the protectee?
A principal is usually what would be said.
anyway, by Trump, or there may have been problems of coordination, there may have been issues, who knows? But right now it looks like it's a very, very serious one. Whatever about the inevitable, and I don't discount the fact that that will continue and will grow with time, the conspiracy notion that this was actually a setup. And it was, who knows? At the moment, it's on the left saying that it was Trump doing it as a form of theatre. I'm sure there will be people on the right who will say that it was actually organised by the deep state and the Illuminati, and that the Secret Service failed because the Secret Service were told to fail. It's a bit like, those, like Oliver Stone and various others, when they talk about the Kennedy assassination, and this regiment was stepped down and that was set down, and so these planes were in the air and something happened in New Zealand, and that could not have happened except with authorization from the very top, so there had to be collusion. It'll be something like, this kind of failure could not have happened unless it happened on the back of collusion at the very highest level. So because of the problems that the Democrats are having with Biden et al., this was the only response they could do because Donald is going to save the world. Or maybe, I shouldn't say it. Should I say it? Because will I feed it? It just occurred to me, a very good target for the conspiracies, maybe it was the Ukrainians, because Donald was going to bring peace. There are going to be all sorts. But leaving that aside, shall we say the obviously crazy people aside, what did you think? The reaction of the mainstream media to some of it, in the immediate aftermath, was, well, if it had not been Trump, it's hard to imagine it would have been. For example, the headline online: Trump removed from stage by Secret Service after loud noises startles former president.
I will just make a note here, but there are some fantastic headlines on that. When we were reporting it, we didn't use the phrase assassination attempt, and some people took that as a comment on it. But it was because it went up nearly immediately, and no one had any idea what was happening. And then, the headline changes as things go on. So that does happen, Michael. Headlines evolve over time, and it's not always an attempt to position it a particular way. It's because you don't know what's happening.
I understand that. The word that makes me skeptical about this is the word startles, because the grammar of that sentence to me suggests that the reason he was taken off the stage was that Donald was startled, and therefore left. He was startled. After loud noise startles. I think it's like Don going, "Oh my God, what was that? Get me off! Get me off!"
I mean, once it immediately happened, when we were looking at it, trying to figure out how we could write it, there were people saying that it wasn't a bullet that had hit him, that the teleprompter had broken, as in someone had tried to shoot him and had hit the teleprompter and deflected, and that's what had cut him. There was talk it might have been an air rifle, because initially, you've got to remember, we had the video of the noises, it sounded like gunshots, and we had the video of Trump being taken down, but you didn't have anything like the knowledge that someone in the crowd had been killed. And on the video, the crowd behind him looks fine.
Yes.
So there was a question of, what's happening here? Now, having said that, and, contextualize that, Michael, in a way I think is, just to be a bit fair, I did want to highlight CNN's initial headline.
Yes.
Which was this: Secret Service rushes Trump off stage after he falls at rally.
Oh, yes.
Okay, now that headline, I think, is not perhaps because they didn't know what was happening and, we're trying to gather more information. A classic of the genre, I think. You would agree.
Yeah. It carries a certain context to it. It feels like it brings its own context, certainly, yeah.
I mean, one thing we will touch on is I think, the media in this. Not just on the reporting of it, but what's been happening and why this is not really surprising, although we don't know the motives of the assassin yet.
We know, as of yet, what about the assassin?
So, a name has been released, but very little detail about that person other than they appear to have been somewhere around 20 years old and from the local area. There are some There's some photos going around showing him in a T-shirt that people are saying is the T-shirt of a popular gun YouTuber called Demolition Ranch. The left are saying he was registered as a Republican. Other people are saying that he donated to Give Blue, which is a Democratic, PAC. So it's unclear as to what this person's thought process were, where he was politically, why he was doing this. You could have, political animosity towards Trump for regular standard Democrat reasons. Could have been something else. Could have just been a lunatic. We're going to find out, I'd say, fairly quickly, because given the massive security issues here, everyone is going to want to make this as clear as possible to deflect from their own failings. So I suspect you're going to see an investigation carried out at some real speed here. I think one thing to touch on before we get to the media is the likely impact of this on the presidential election. I would suspect this makes it more likely that Biden is the candidate against Trump. For this reason, you're not guaranteed a boost in the polls after someone tries to kill you. But I will say this, Michael. Trump took getting shot just incredibly well. He is going to come out of this looking fantastic. Presidential. I don't know if you've seen the meme, which is, it's two videos. One is Joe Biden trying to get up a staircase, and one is Donald Trump after getting shot in the head.
Right.
And it's just a very different level of vitality. I think he will look extremely good after this. I think if he uses this correctly, it will be a massive bludgeon to target the Democrats with. And I think on that basis, all of this talk of replacing Biden with someone, his replacements might be a little bit hesitant to get involved now. Because if Trump looks even more solid, well, then you're going to lose. So why get involved when you're going to lose when instead Joe Biden could lose?
Yeah, there's a number of things, I suppose, about that. Gary, and I'm not joking here, but somebody just try and shoot Donald Trump. If you're thinking, I might go for a bit of a run at the Democratic nomination, and chances are lose the presidential campaign election, even if I get the nomination, there's a possibility out there someone might take a shot at me. And that might be a disincentive for some people. I speak as one of those people who would be disincentivized by the possibility of someone shooting me in the head. But I don't think that they can run Biden now. I mean, they've got themselves in this position all by themselves. I do not believe that more than a year ago that they did not know that this was the reality. And once somebody has some kind of a cognitive issue, it's not going to fix itself. It's only going to go in one direction. So they knew that if it was an issue a year and a half ago or whatever, and I think it was, then they should be acting now. So, okay, let's look at the last two gaffes. You can call them gaffes, but every single gaffe from now on, Gary, is going to just be another faggot on the pyre. He referred to Zelensky as Putin and to Donald Trump as his vice president.
Now, I will, on the vice president thing, it did lead to, I think, the funniest joke of the night. Because Joe Biden didn't respond to this for about an hour and a half, possibly because he was sleepy. But the best response I saw was, it's shocking that Joe Biden hasn't responded given that someone tried to assassinate his vice president an hour and a half ago.
Yeah. So, I think that the reality... But, okay, we adverted to the problem they have before was that if they said that the guy isn't suitable to run for president, well, then they also have to say, well, you know what, maybe he's not fit to be president right now, which means the cabinet has to get together and come to that decision. But the problem is that if they replace him, then they replace him with Kamala. And Kamala doesn't look like being a better candidate than Joe, frankly, at the level of the polling. Also, all the money that's been raised has been raised for the Biden-Kamala ticket. Now, Joe can step off, but only if he's replaced by Kamala can the money. So all that money is tied up. We've already heard there was a pack with 90 million that is frozen at the moment. It's frozen its funds because it's unsure how those monies are going to be spent. So we are now a month out. They have a problem with funding. They have a problem with the candidate. They have a problem with replacing the candidate. All things are possible with God. But right now, I don't see how the Democrats can replace Biden, put in a new ticket, get the money together, run a campaign, and beat Trump. Let alone a Trump that has risen phoenix-like from this assassination attempt. I think it's a very bad idea in politics, in electoral politics, to say these things are a done deal. I think usually, if it's like the North Korean elections, you can be fairly confident about the results, and you can even go down to petty power, put out the mortgage. But it's very close at the moment to being a done deal. They've put themselves in a horrible position. And it's very hard to see how they extricate themselves from it. And even if they did, there are candidates out there that might appeal to Middle America. But the chances that... They talk about Newsom, and I think Newsom's good at the communications stuff, but I don't think that Newsom is... What do I know? Fetterman would be an out-of-the-box thinking choice. But how likely are they to go for someone like Fetterman?
0% chance.
So I don't see it. I think that we normally, when there's something like this, the candidate that has the assassination attempt will receive a bump in the polls. And maybe, as you say, that will be a disincentive. Nobody who has a chance will look and think, well, why run? Why ruin myself?
Yeah, again, I do need to point out, this is one of the best response to an assassination attempt I've ever seen.
I don't know.
I mean,
Reagan
being pulled off, Reagan was pretty good, and then the follow-on with the balloon was fantastic.
Yeah.
But where Trump is being pulled off the stage, and he physically stops the Secret Service from pulling him to safety, and just starts like, wait, just so he can get his fist in the air and start shouting out the word fight to rile up his supporters, leading to these photographs. I mean, the man's understanding of the importance of branding is just incredible. And again, it appears he's just been shot in the head, and he's still enough with it to be like, if I do this, this is going to look fantastic.
This will look cool.
Yeah. And he gets it. And it's just, again, Joe Biden struggles with stairs and knowing where he is and knowing where he's, who he's talking to.
Just something something that struck me just there the other day. I was rereading some notes from another thing, and it created an angle. Do you remember we talked about a report on sexual assault occurring in UCD some time ago?
Was this the report that, I'm not sure if this was the actual result, but it basically said that UCD was worse than the Congo?
Yeah, worse than the Congo at war. And everybody was very concerned, and the government was concerned, and the UCD was concerned, and the response to having higher levels of sexual violence against women was to set up a committee.
Yes.
And I said to you at the time that this is how we know that they don't believe that this report is in any way, shape or form true. Because if we go back to Aristotle and the Poetics, Aristotle says that when you put on in theatre, he said, don't have expositional writing, basically. You don't get characters to tell you who they are by saying who they are. They tell you who they are by how they act, how they behave. So we don't know what people are by what they tell you, but by how they behave. And because they behaved like that, we know. Because if they had actually believed it, UCD the following day would have been thronged with the army, and then every parent in the country would have removed their children from it, and probably the UCD would have been closed down and turned into a duck pond. And you know what? Worse things have happened. But they didn't do that. And in this, all the Democrats have been saying, well, Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. This will be the end of American democracy.
Donald Trump is a fascist. Yeah, he is Hitler.
He is Hitler, all this. And it struck me. We can actually know with confidence that they don't believe that's true. Because that's what they're saying, but that's not what they're doing. If they believed that Donald Trump was an existential threat to democracy, Joe Biden would not be running now. He would be off the ticket. Because they know to a degree of 90% that Joe Biden cannot beat Trump. So if he was an existential threat to American democracy, Joe Biden wouldn't be the candidate. They would have found another candidate, and they would have found him long ago, or her, and they would be running that candidate because they would be terrified of the consequences of a Trump victory.
Well, I think one way you can actually see that they don't believe it is the amount of them who are now saying, well, we hope Donald Trump has a speedy recovery.
Yeah. Which you wouldn't have said about Hitler sometime after, when von Stauffenberg's attempt to blow him up in East Prussia had occurred. You didn't hear Churchill or de Gaulle or Roosevelt sending notes in saying, well, we hope Herr Hitler has a speedy recovery.
Yeah, it does tie into what I wanted to briefly mention about the media and the language here. Like, on Donald Trump, Mitch Romney was called a fascist and akin to Hitler when he ran. A man so incredibly inoffensive that when Saturday Night Live wanted to do a send-up of him, all they could think of was that he secretly hides full-fat milk around his house.
But wasn't that a wonderful manifestation of precisely who he was?
It was, yes.
Everybody agreed, post factum, Mitt Romney was bright, competent, compassionate, engaged, charitable, successful in his own right, honest. He was a pattern of what you would want in a Republican candidate. But Bill Maher has talked about this, post factum, that this is what we said about Romney. This is what we said about McCain. Two people that we now look at and we go, oh, how wonderful, how lovely. Aren't they great? We think they're super people. And somebody wrote an article, I can't remember, recently, and it was really interesting. I don't know if I mentioned it before to you, Gary, but they're talking about the consequences of that Romney campaign. And they said that one of the things that Trump understood from that, now, whether he understood it at an intellectual level or an instinctive level, whatever, was that from now on, it didn't matter, and in a sense, about the facts when it came to a Republican-Democrat context. So there was no point in engaging in the context at that level. And what Trump essentially changed was the aesthetics. He changed the aesthetics of campaigning in a way that subverted. He didn't care about the facts. I mean, famously didn't care about the facts. And it became, you could see the frustration of his critics as he would tell bizarre lie after bizarre lie, or shall we say, colourful mischaracterization after colourful mischaracterization, depending on how you perceived it. And it didn't seem to matter. And you were saying that the response would be, he'd point, put your gun away, you're stupid and you're ugly. That was and you didn't know how to respond to that, because he just completely changed the aesthetic of the campaign, and it made it impossible to pin him down. And ultimately, Biden gets elected because people get tired of the aesthetic. They want a return to normality. All of the energy, all of the hyperness, all of the weirdness had been fine, and it would work against Hillary. But with Biden, they thought, yeah, grand. This is what we know. This is what we like. Something calm, something ordinary, something normal. And the problem is that Biden is in the choice now. Donald is the more ordinary, the more normal. And it's a very weird situation for the world's most powerful country.
Extremely, extremely odd. But on this, I mean, obviously we don't know why the assassination attempt occurred. We don't know what the political leanings of the person were. The only thing I think actually surprising about this is that, frankly, it hasn't happened sooner. I mean, we have had, at this point, basically a decade of language used about Trump, which could very easily be used to justify an assassination attempt. The things about fascism, the things about a new Hitler, the demented and constant chorus that he seeks to strip everyone of their rights and will destroy the American Republic.
Yes.
Turns out may actually have consequences.
Yeah, and as I said before, what's particularly grotesque about this is the fact that they plainly don't believe it to be true.
Well, no, that's the thing. You can see it here with all of the well wishes and all of the... But I think the problem is the people who say it at the top levels don't believe it to be true. Journalists who say it are, Michael, and let's be kind here, generally fucking idiots.
Yeah.
Even if they're intelligent otherwise, they're the sort of people who, when politics come up, the IQ just drops, 3 standard deviations. They just cannot deal with political affairs. We've got a couple of those in Ireland as well. They're always fun to deal with. Some wonderful professors who, if you read their non-political work, you go, yeah, actually, maybe they, these guys seem on the ball. And then they end up talking about politics and you're just like, you are a lunatic. I mean, even the Irish media has been full of this kind of stuff. And I would link it back to the sort of stuff that you hear about the far right a lot of the time. It's not factually correct. It's an aesthetic point of view. It is a delegitimization tactic. And it has consequences. In the same way, Michael, I would say a lot of the language you hear coming from the other side of people referring to people as traitors and things like that could actually have the same impact. And everyone is incentivized to use this kind of language as long as you have no kind of murring to stop you from doing so on ethical grounds because it's effective. But yeah, eventually you reach the point where something happens because of it. And while that may not have been the issue here, we don't know yet, it's absolutely foreseeable that eventually this sort of language causes a problem. And when it causes a problem, then everyone has to very rapidly go, oh, well, we wish him the best, great guy. I won't be taking any follow-on questions right now. Please don't send me anything I said previously. Like Biden the other day was at a rally and he said that Donald Trump is legitimately a threat to American democracy, which when your opponent then gets shot by someone might be a little bit more difficult to explain.
In the past, and without going into sort of high-flown rhetoric or polemic, but I think just as a simple fact, in the past, when nations have been considered to be threats to American democracy, America has dealt with those threats in a particular kind of way. So if you're saying that an individual within the United States is a threat to American democracy, I think you have to be cognizant that there may well be people who will take that seriously and will take that as an invitation to action. This is a country that has an amendment which guarantees, for an armed militia, was it? A well-regulated militia being necessary for the defense of the Republic. The right of the citizens to bear arms is guaranteed. Something like that is the amendment. I think is that the Second Amendment?
That's the Second Amendment, yeah.
Anyway, that amendment is there because Americans believe in the right to overthrow tyrants, like King George, and that it is the right of the citizen to oppose tyranny. That is built into their constitutional DNA. So if you're saying relentlessly, and they have been fairly relentlessly saying, listen, this guy is actually a threat to the Republic, it may have consequences. No, we don't know what this guy is. And even if it had nothing to do with him, it still is reprehensible language. We hear a lot of of the language of othering from friends on the left. And you know what? When it's done from the point of view of race, or from the point of view, like you said, the use of the word traitor for somebody who doesn't describe to the pure understanding that Donald is the second coming, whatever, that is a very bad thing. But this is othering. If you want to talk about it in that kind of language, this is pure othering. Fascist, Nazi, Hitler, whatever it is. This is language that's just used to delegitimize and to place outside the pale of the community an individual. And I think that if you're going to be a politician, or if you're going to be a serious national media organization, you have to find other language. You have to find another way of doing your critique. And also, Gary, is it not possible that other language actually might have been more effective? Rather than matching Trump's rhetoric, rather than going hot to match hot, if they dialed it down and gone cool, it might have actually been a more effective way of dealing with the man.
Yes, I suppose to your great hope now, which is this Trump that says something coming after being shot.
Yes, we must all come together as brothers and sisters of the Republic. In the light of the fact that people died, the whole thing is rather macabre. But for Donald, the big question now is how he responds, how he manages this moment. I would say, so far, he's been pretty good with the Biden thing. I mean, the debate, I think a lot of people were surprised how well he handled the debate, that he didn't go over the top in response to the obvious gaffes and meanderings of the president, but kind of just let it happen and stood there and watched it and said, and occasionally would look at the camera as if to say, do you see what I see? Do you hear what I'm hearing? Is this not fucked up? What the hell is happening? So he may have a better handle on what the best way, the most effective response to this kind of thing is. We shall see. It's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if I was the Democrats, I wouldn't be terribly comfortable with the fact that Trump now has this and is going to be able to use this in his campaign. And his reaction now could be immensely powerful if done correctly, and immensely helpful to him getting re-elected. I think it was CNN who reported, they said one of their breaking news items was that White House in state of shock after assassination attempt. Presumably that's kind of the standard response to someone just tried to kill your main opponent.
Mm.
And in a way that is not going to be very helpful. It's actually one of the problems with political violence that you don't hear enough about, Michael. Obviously there's all the moral and ethical arguments against it, but there's also just a standard argument against the effectiveness of it. Because if he had killed Trump, well then a certain segment of the Republican Party would have been quite happy that they were able to replace Trump with someone else, while keeping all of his people behind them, and presumably going in a massive sympathy vote. And if you don't kill Trump, and Trump handles it well, which he did, then you just make Trump more popular.
In 1964, how many states did Goldwater win? Did he win any?
Goldwater was the worst loss of the Republican presidential candidate that the Republican Party had ever suffered.
So, the assassination of President Kennedy wasn't a great political success. Although, obviously, people who believed it was the mafia and CIA and blah, blah, and people who wanted to give, anyway, say it was actually a tremendous success. But from a political point of view, as regards LBJ's election, it was an absolute landslide.
I was 6. I think he took 6 states.
Did he took 6 states?
Yeah, I think 6. He took a couple of the southern states, Arizona, those kind of ones. He was destroyed on the Electoral College. He was destroyed on the popular vote. I think Johnson got nearly 1 3/4 time, maybe, on the popular vote. What Goldwater got, it was a bloodbath. It was.
When Reagan ran against Mondale, he lost. He won every state except Minnesota, which is Mondale's home state. And that year he was asked, "What would you like for Christmas?" And Reagan's response was, "Maybe Minnesota," which was kind of good.
Yeah. Although people don't speak enough about Nixon in a second term, that was a crushing win.
Yeah, remember, I mean, the Democrats did not do themselves any favors there. Now, Nixon was probably going to win well anyway, but you had McGovern and McGovern was a bad candidate anyway, but not a bad man, but a bad candidate. Was it his VP his VP candidate had to resign because it turned out he'd had electroshock therapy? And there was all sorts of... put it this way, Watergate was not necessary, Gary. Watergate need never happened. He need not have been worried about the Democrats.
No. And an end to an otherwise fine presidency.
But that was Dickie for you.
Anyway, this is still actively developing. We will see what happens here. It'll be immensely interesting to see what the actual intention of the assassin was here, where they were coming from, what they were actually trying to do. Is this someone from the left? Is this just a conspiracy theorist? Is this a lunatic? And as I said, I suspect we'll find this out pretty quickly because everyone looks horrendous for letting this happen. Which, by the way, is when these conspiracy theories about this being deliberate, I think that is the immediate counterweight.
Yes.
This just looks too bad to the people involved. It already looks absolutely horrendous, but had it actually worked, it would have been an absolute nightmare for them. Anyway, the NCT, Michael, who wants to end on a lighter note.
On a lighter note, I don't know, did you see the story that James Lawless, the new Junior Minister for Transport, after the reshuffle with Micheál McGrath being sent off to Europe, we don't know yet what high-powered job Micheál is going to get in the Commission, do we?
No, but again, all of the Fianna Fáil MEPs are voting against von der Leyen.
Micheál is pained by the experience, isn't he? And we mentioned the last time, I think it was, that Harris had said, the thing is, when you're voting for the Commission, you are the Commissioner, you have to think of it not as for her, the Commission, the President, but rather her whole team. Please, lads, let's make sure Micheál gets a good job. Am I right in saying that Coveney has announced that he's not going to run again?
Coveney is gone as well? No, you're right.
So, Coveney's gone, Micheál McGrath has gone. I think we heard, or I don't know if it's public, but we hear that Sherlock isn't standing. So, Micheál has gone from being in the constituency of death to basically being King Kong on the island alone. And I don't know if you've been talking to any Fianna Fáilers recently, but there's a growing sense in Fianna Fáil that Micheál's never going to leave the only thing that is going to get Micheál out is a run at the Áras. And they're desperately encouraging him. Yes, Micheál, you'd make a lovely president. Why don't you do that? Now, there's strong vibes we've heard recently about Micheál running for the Áras. And he may be, but I also do wonder if some of this isn't just encouragement within the parliamentary party, because otherwise there is no desire, no mechanism, nothing that suggests that you will not be able to prize the leadership out of his hands. Was it Charlton Heston? My cold dead hands. It's very much that kind of scenario. Anyway, James Lawless has announced that he is going to strengthen the NCT in order to deal with the road deaths. It's not a huge story, but there are a couple of things that I'm just curious about. I'll be curious to know what evidence he has that any increases to the stringency of the NCT would in fact lead to a reduction in road deaths. I'd be curious to know what evidence he has that the NCT has reduced road deaths up to now. What the costs will be to the consumer. Will this lead to more cars being put off the road and people being forced to either go carless or to have to upgrade to newer cars? And we all know Gary, as the listeners will know, is a passionate environmentalist and would be very worried about this, because we know that the longer you can keep an old car on the road, even though it might seem counterintuitive, because older cars are less fuel efficient and maybe produce more emissions, but because of the environmental impact of building a new car, that you're better off keeping old cars on the road as long as you possibly can. And this would imagine lead to more new cars being used rather than that. Do you remember we were in Sweden, Gary, and we came across, we're talking about road safety, and one of the things I thought was interesting, remember this, one of the Swedes was telling us there that when there were road accidents, the very first question that Swedes looked at was the issue of the road. Which I thought was interesting and sensible. You don't see it so much because obviously the road system in Ireland has been massively upgraded and improved over the last 20 years or so. But you still do occasionally come across these signs saying road black spot ahead. And it's always occurred to me, well, if you know that the road is killing people, would it not make more sense to make the road better rather than put a sign up saying this road may kill you? I'm just curious to know what the evidence is regarding the number of accidents that occur every year in Ireland, particularly fatal accidents that occur as a result of mechanical failure, and are failures that would have been spotted or corrected by the NCT and what new tests the NCTs are going to do that would have prevented accidents or fatal accidents otherwise.
So I have tried to look into this previously, and it's actually quite difficult to find good data on fatalities in Ireland. So the Road Safety Authority publishes certain statistics, but they'll give you, Michael, when it happened, the gender, the sex of those involved, where it happened, age profiles, things like that, but not what actually caused this, what was deemed to be the cause of this crash. So it's very difficult to actually work out why this is happening. Having looked at the statistics, I would imagine that mechanical failure is not a particularly prevalent cause of fatalities, and that's based on three kind of different facts. One, about 50% of fatalities occur between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m. So they're over the night. Combine that with this fact, about half of fatalities occur between Friday and Sunday.
Right.
And somewhere in the region, I think last year it was about 70%, occurred on rural roads which had a speed limit of at least 80 kilometres.
Mm-hmm.
Now, weekends at night on rural roads where you can go over 80 kilometres, I would say that's either road conditions or driver conditions.
Yeah.
Probably not. If you were seeing widespread mechanical failures, they would be randomly distributed over the 7 days. They would be randomly distributed over the roads. But that's not what we see.
Also, and I'm just speculating here, I don't know. But I would have thought that if mechanical failures were playing a role in this, we would have, first of all, we would see them happening on motorways, because the large volume of traffic nowadays in Ireland happens in motorways. Motorways are also where cars are going to be travelling at the highest speed, because that's the highest speed limits, and it's easier. You've got the speed limit of 120 kilometres an hour, but a lot of people, unfortunately, on motorways travel at more than that. And if you have an accident at that kind of speed on a motorway, Gary, you're going to have fatalities, because it is correct to say that speed will be an element of the severity of an accident. The faster you're going, if you have an accident, you have a crash, then the more likely you are to die. And also, if there's traffic on the road, well, the more likely you are to kill somebody else. And yet we know that we have very, very safe motorways indeed. Also, in other jurisdictions where they have more detailed information on this kind of thing, my understanding is, now it's a while since I looked at these stats, so I don't know. I wouldn't be able to put my finger on the link now. But my understanding was that mechanical failures in Western European countries tend to represent an infinitesimally small part. It's either road failure, traffic conditions, but mostly it's driver failure.
Yeah, there was one interesting stat when I looked back at the data on this, and it was the amount of people who were wearing seatbelts. In only 40% of cases were they able to show the person who died was wearing a seatbelt.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. I mean, it is true. I mean, for anybody of my age, when you see accidents that occur now, and you see cars in a dreadful state, and you find out afterwards that somebody got out of the car almost unscathed, it's remarkable. The degree to which cars are better designed to deal with catastrophic incidents like this than they were 40, 50 years ago is massive. Now, Gary, I'm not saying that the man doesn't have evidence, there isn't data to support this move. I'm skeptical that there is, but I'm willing to, I'd be curious to know what there is. It feels like that this is a response to a period where we had a number of fatalities occurring in a small space of time together, which generated a sense that there was a terrible problem and we needed to do something, and that this is a performative act of politics. something that's going to make life more difficult and more expensive and more awkward for people, but probably not actually going to achieve anything. And it's just another symptom of the kind of politics that increasingly is what Irish politicians seem to think they should do. Rather than actually do things that make a difference in the real world, they do things which look like they're acting and will get them a positive reaction. And they'll, I don't know, maybe the RSA, the Road Safety Authority, will come back and say, yeah, this is a very good idea, and people on the media will say this is a very good idea, and people in the media will write stories about Minister taking firm action, and everyone will go, well done, because he's trying to save lives. But in fact, all he will have done is just made life more difficult and more expensive for people. But if there is evidence out there, Gary, and if you happen to know any journalists, you're friendly with, that would maybe ask the minister this question, I would be very curious to know the answer.
I think one thing I would just note here, and this is really a constant across Ireland, and official Ireland particularly, the statistics that are released by the Road Safety Authority are quite bad. I mean, they're basic beyond belief. There's no real information on what's happening. So even where I was saying about the thing about 40% of people being shown to be wearing seatbelts, in 50% of the cases, they didn't know if those people were wearing seatbelts. So that could be because of the nature of the crashes, Michael. Maybe there's such a severity that it's impossible to tell. But 50% being so mangled that you couldn't tell if they were wearing a seatbelt? I highly doubt that. I suspect it's just errors in data collection. There's nothing about what is causing this, the type of people, beyond a very basic kind of sex and age breakdown. There's no breakdown by cause, mechanical failure, road issues. And I understand that you'd have to have investigations to determine what's happening there, Michael, but we just don't seem to do it. So, and then they do a 5-year trend analysis. The last one they came out with, it was in 2022 on their website, which now, Michael, you generally do this on a rolling basis. So we're missing a year. But even that, where they're looking back on the past 5 years, is terrible. It's useless. I mean, there's enough there that you could at a high level say, maybe some stuff is happening. But absolutely not enough for any sort of serious look at this. And this is a standard thing for Irish organisations, particularly state organisations. They release data, but it's either improperly done or it's not sufficient. And usually you just go, well, you're just doing this to do it, to say we release research on this when the research is actually useless.
I recognise, of course, that if you come from a family or a community that has lost somebody to a fatal car accident, then statistics aren't a great source of comfort to you. But it is worth pointing out, in the middle of a lot of reporting, which was kind of high rhetoric, that Irish roads are, in the context of Western European roads, Western world, safe.
Incredibly safe.
Yeah, we don't. I mean, the motorways, I think, are amongst the safest in the world. We have a problem. I think that you adverted to something which is true, which is that we have weird speed limits on non-principal roads. There are roads which until the advent of the motorways, principal roads, and were 100 kilometers an hour, and then were reduced to 80, which would be perfectly safe at 100. But there are other roads which have 80 kilometers an hour. And I'm very conscious of this when I'm driving country roads around where I live, that there are roads which I would not drive at more than 60. I would not. No, I'm not the most aggressive driver in the world, but I would absolutely not feel comfortable driving these at more than 60 kilometers an hour most of the time. And if you're driving at 80, I think it's risky. So but the problem there, Gary, is you can talk about dealing with that, but unless you're going to put some kind of a massive investment in putting guards on the back roads around Ireland with speed traps, how are you going to police that? I would still say it wouldn't be a bad idea to reduce the speed limits on some of those back roads, because I think it would be at least an indicator to people, slow down, it's actually unsafe, and you might catch some people. On motorways, I would be comfortable on the best motorways of increasing the speed limit. Yeah, you look at the Germans, I don't think. But we don't have dangerous roads.
Last year, for instance, we were talking about this, massive increase in deaths, a veritable slaughter on the roads, that kind of thing. Last year saw less than 50% die on the roads of what we saw in 2000, 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm. The
rates have fallen incredibly. And now when they move up, we say, well, percently they go up massively. It's because Ireland, if you think about it, Michael, we are a country of, 5.5 million people?
Yeah.
And 180 people might die on the roads. 130 to 180. You could have that double in a year and half in another year because the numbers are so small. It doesn't take a lot for these to move quite widely because, again, you have millions of people. But just on one point, actually, on the Road Safety Authority and their data. One of the things they put out, because I was looking into this a while ago because I wanted to know was, what's happening here. And I thought a lot of the reporting on the road deaths was vastly overblown because basically we're coming from such a low statistical level that it's very easy to make the numbers look big, but actually they're exceptionally small. And the RSA had done a piece of research which was Irish road deaths, I think it was 1950 to 2023, that kind of thing. And it was 2 pages long, that research document. And all it was they had just, it was just a table, and all it said was 1954, 1955, and the number of deaths. And that was it. That was their research paper.
It's a bit thin.
And, you kind of go, I feel if I was the person assigned to overlook this area and had decided I was going to do a research study looking at what had happened and perhaps, Michael, what we could learn based on that, there might have been more I could say.
Possibly, yes. There might have been a little bit more.
Maybe what was the population at this time? Because maybe that has a difference. Or, what changed this year where it dropped dramatically? Or, just a general, what the fuck is going on? As opposed to, here is a stats table. Which I've, if I had this information on hand, would have taken me 5 minutes to pull together. Maybe I didn't have it on hand. Maybe I had to, go back and pull this information and release it as a two. And the great thing is, it has the, the very stylized front and back page that they always do. So it's just this took longer to graphic design than it took to write.
That's basic stuff. And maybe they do this, I don't know. You'll know better than me because you've looked more recently at this data. If you look at the numbers of fatalities, say, between 2000 and today, you're talking, and then you look year on year of an increase or decrease in fatalities. That's one thing, but that's just a gross number. The population has massively increased. That's one thing. But first of all, you have to look at the number of cars, but most of all, you have to look at the number of miles traveled. And more, not only has the population increased, the number of people driving has increased proportionately, because we have had a very significant increase in population, which hasn't been as a result of natality, but rather of adults moving into the country, of whom the large majority drive. So we have a very disproportionately large increase in the number of people driving, which also leads to a disproportionately large number, rather than an incremental number, in the number of miles being driven. And that's the core data point that you need to have, is the average number of accidents that occur on the basis of miles driven, rather than the gross number of fatalities that happens in each year. Because even if the numbers of fatalities increase, the relative numbers of fatalities in proportion to the number of miles driven may be decreasing.
I'm going to make perhaps an unpopular point here. I think that the Road Safety Authority has really gone down a very kind of stupid path, not just in relation to what you said. And yes, obviously, they don't weigh anything due to population. They don't, from what I've seen, look at hours driven, or at least I've never seen it on any of their reports. There's ways you can do that. It would be standard in other countries. You just get the raw, unfiltered, numbers. And the fact that, in 2000 we had over 400 deaths on the roads, and in 2020 there were less than 150, despite the growth in the population, is actually incredibly noteworthy. But they've no research on why that might be, or at least no public-facing research I've seen. But they've also set themselves what they call Vision Zero as a target. And I think it's just moronic. I think it's absolutely lunacy. But it's the exact type of lunacy you get from basically NGOs. Vision Zero says that the aim of the RSI is to reduce road fatalities to zero by 2050. Now, that sounds lovely. Deaths on the road, great for organ donations. That counterweighs it a bit, but usually a tragedy. But you're not going to get to zero road fatalities while people drive.
Gary,
it's not possible.
You wouldn't get zero deaths on the roads even if people didn't drive.
No, because you'd get pedestrians.
You get pedestrians killing each other. You get people on bicycles dying. You get people in horses and riding horses, or in horses and carts, or ass and carts dying. Before we ever had cars, you had fatalities on the road. You're never going, as long as there are people on roads, there will be fatalities on roads. It's another net zero, which is nonsense. No.
Yeah, but it's this sort of unwillingness to say, well, that's not possible. That is simply not possible to do. Because organizations do this because it's kind of got a feel-good factor, but I think when you realign what your actual aim is like this, it does have impacts. Because you're measuring against, well, we've got to reduce it to zero. That's going to lead you to do very different things than if your measurement is, we've got to reduce this to the lowest that is conceivable, within these assumptions, which is what you have. Because you're never going to get zero. Even, as you said, if there is self-driving cars, things like that, they're going to hit pedestrians. People are still going to die on the roads. It is impossible to stop it without banning basically all transit. So why the fuck would you say you're going to do it?
I think it's far more sensible. How sensible it is, but more sensible. Say, for example, again, Sweden. I think Sweden was recently declared the first country in the world to be smoke-free. And that was on the basis that the number of people smoking in Sweden had fallen below 5%. And I think that's a more reasonable way of doing it. Fix a low number and say that's our target. We're not going to be able to. We're not going to go for some kind of utopian target of saying zero. We're never going to achieve zero. So let's go for a reasonable. Everything, but even then, your targets have to be contextualized. And have to be the data has to be done within the context in which the population is happening and changing. And most of all, your policy choices have to be driven by some kind of real world evidence that this is actually going to make a difference, rather than just simply looking like you're doing something when in fact you're not doing anything at all. Anyway, on that note, we shall return. We should all of us go back off to X and to see how Donald is and to see how things are, because this is a continuing thing. We may have more to chat about on that subject next Sunday. Oh, but we won't.
No.
We won't.
I'm not going to be here. I'm bringing the students to Washington.
Because Gary is going to visit Donald in hospital, if he's in hospital. And bring him our best wishes. Gary is going to Washington with some children and show them around.
When we say children, I should say we mean college students.
Yeah, but we call them children because anyway,
yeah, that's what they are.
That's what they are. So we'll be back, whenever, because you're going to be away for a full week, working hard. I looked it up. I think the temperature in Washington is 34 degrees at the moment, Gary.
Yeah, the problem in Washington is not just the temperature. The problem in Washington is the humidity.
Mm-hmm.
It's horrible. Never go to Washington in summer.
Or if you're Mark Twain, you could say never go to Washington.
I mean, yeah, that would be a generally good thing. No, we will leave it at that. Enjoy the increase in the stringency of the NCT and therefore the subsidy for the car sellers. That'll be great fun. Not like those markets are going crazy.
And we shall be back when we shall be back. Have a good week.
All the best.